What do you think about Twitter fact-checking Donald Trump? Ha! They play this game. They play this game where they play this game where they say we're open platforms, anybody can be a part of it, and we don't take a position, and we're neutral, and we want as many people as to come and play. And then they say, well, that's not manageable, so we'll add a code of conduct. And they have a code of conduct, and then they're like, wow, it's impossible to enforce this when we have billions of users. So we'll do selective enforcement, and nobody complains when it's people without a voice who get deplatformed or have problems. But then when they use it on political figures, then it becomes a big issue. And it's really interesting is that there's this amazing situation where every party's been on every side. Like the left was a big advocate of the Fairness Doctrine, which came out in, I think, the 40s, and it was repealed later on. Basically, it says, hey, you're in this public utility, you have to give all sides equal time. This is the kind of the concept. And so a lot of people said we need to have the internet be a utility, and these social media platforms are not private entities, they're utilities as well, and therefore they should be regulated by Fairness Doctrine S-type ways of doing things. And then other people say, oh, no, it's a private company. They can do whatever they want, say whatever they want, censor anybody that they want. And of course, that opinion is always subject to whether you are the recipient of censorship or the beneficiary of censorship. So when it's the opposing party, then it's all cool. When it's your guy, well, it's the worst thing in the world. I do believe that these networks, because of their scale and their influence on human behavior, are utilities in a certain respect, just like the internet is. And to say that because a private company happened to have started it, that somehow that should be the final say, and a small group of people in San Francisco should basically get to decide what's legitimate speech and what's not, what's hate speech, what's not, what's facts, what's not facts, is very troublesome. Because what happens when the Communist Party of China buys one of these companies off the stock market? Then they're a private company. I guess they can just say any tweet that is anti-China is now taken down. Censorship? Oh, no, it's a private company. We're totally okay with it. So got to think it through. You have to look at all these things. So the only way to solve this problem is to make the platform a protocol like a cryptocurrency. So there was a lot of good ideas in Steam. Ultimately, like all Dan Larimer projects, some good ideas mixed with some bad ones. The bad ones overcame the good. You had to move on. So reevaluating the concept of blockchain-based social media is important, but it's a super complicated problem. And we're not going to solve it in just one protocol. You're going to have to layer things together. You need things like Prism. You need things like BATS. You need things like what we're building with Cardano. You need some notion of privacy. You need some voting systems for community curation. Once you put all these pieces together, you can build a protocol-based social network. And then the problem is solved because no private company owns the infrastructure. And therefore, they don't get to say what's legitimate or not legitimate with the infrastructure. Instead, community curation will create an effect where messages that are preferred are elevated and messages that are not preferred are phased out over time. They get dimmer and dimmer and more buried. And if you've done it right, idea flow should be very good in these systems. And the emergent property of them is that they're self-healing and resilient, and they tend to identify misinformation as opposed to accelerating the spreading of it. The problem is that we live in an age of confirmation bias, and we live in an age of siloing. People tend to share things they already agree with, and they tend to censor things that they disagree with. So that means that instead of having the platform be an opportunity for people to diversify their opinion or increase their understanding of the world, it's an opinion to accelerate the rigidity of their existing opinions and the stability of their opinions to a point where they think that everybody believes what they believe, and the people who don't must be in the minority, whether they are or not. So obviously these systems are not working as intended. And there's some great books on this, like Alex Pentland's Social Physics, for example. That's a great book to look at. So it's a super hard problem. We'll certainly get involved in that space. Not this year, kids, but we will. It's something important to me. And the censorship is not going to go away. The censorship is going to continue. This is just the first shot. It's pretty unbelievable that the United States president, whoever that president happens to be, is basically having his tweets be labeled with disclaimers. if that's the precedent, it's like, wow, this is not healthy for discourse. The reality is, whether you love him or hate him, it's the most powerful person in the world. He occupies the most powerful office in the world and has the ability to end all human life unilaterally, because he could just simply nuke us all if he wanted to. So that's the reality of that office. Whether that's good or wise or just or not, well, that's a different debate, but that's the reality of the office as it is. They have their own Praetorian Guard. It's called JSOC. And any man who can send black helicopters with special forces and shoot you in the middle of the night, like Obama did with Osama bin Laden, it should give you a sense of the power of that office. So it's not really a good idea for a private company in Silicon Valley to insert itself into this conversation. Some things truly are above your pay grade, and this is probably one of them. And Zuckerberg is playing it really smart, in my view. The proper answer to this problem is not how do we regulate these platforms. The proper answer to this problem is to liberate the users from platforms controlled by centralized private companies and bring them into protocols that are open source, decentralized, dynamic and decentralized, and censorship resilient. Then have private companies and social structures and regulatory structures live on top of that to curate some of these things so that those are safe spaces for certain types of conduct and communication. That's probably the better way of doing it. The other way around, where you have the whole stack vertically integrated, one private company controls it, it just is counterproductive, and no one will ever be happy, ever. Because maybe you agree with the censorship today, you certainly won't agree with it tomorrow. When the owners change, the agenda changes. It's not sustainable, and it's impossible. No one elected these people. They don't deserve the right to decide what's truth and what's not truth, and they don't deserve the right to decide what's fair and not fair. What's better, to have a president who speaks eloquently and never says anything controversial, but then drones more people than any other person alive, or a president that speaks crassly and does less of that? What's real violence in that case? Again, not taking positions or sides here, but you have to understand these are super nuanced things, and you will never get it right. So sometimes you just have to let it go and let it happen, unless you basically want to be God and run everything and think you're so wise and so smart that you can.